Good evening. Welcome to the Critical Hour. We're coming to you from the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., here on Radio Sputnik. I'm your host, political scientist, author, and nationally syndicated columnist, Dr. Wilmer Leon. I'm joined here by my co-host, political analyst, Garland Nixon.
Thank you, Wilmer.
For the next 2 hours, we will explore and analyze the salient news stories that are impacting the global village in which we live. Pentagon leaks suspect Jack Teixeira charged in federal court. The 21-year-old Massachusetts Air National Guardsman accused of leaking documents the Department of Defense says contain sensitive and highly classified material has been charged today with unauthorized retention and transmission of national defense information and willful retention of classified documents. What are we to make of all of this? Well, for insight, let's turn to our first guest. We're going to start the show today the way we do every Friday. We're joined by an independent journalist, writer, author, political analyst, and reporter for RT, Caleb Maupin. As always, Caleb, welcome back.
Sure. Glad to be here, as always.
So it's reported that the FBI on Monday interviewed a member of a social media platform who told a special agent that an individual, later identified to be Teixeira, began posting on the platform what appeared to be classified information, and this goes as far back as December of 2022. The postings, the person said, appeared on a group aimed at discussing geopolitical affairs and current historical wars. Based on conversations this person had with Teixeira, he further learned his first name was Jack and appeared to reside in Massachusetts and claimed he was with the U.S. Air National Guard. And then on April 6th, Teixeira used his government computer to search classified intelligence reporting for the word leak. This is according to the complaint. Your thoughts on all of this, Caleb Maupin?
I got to say, the more I hear about this story, the more I don't buy it. I just got to be honest with you. Why would a 21-year-old low-level Air National Guardsman have access to classified information like this, of this high caliber? I mean, and if indeed, you know, many 21-year-old National Guardsmen from Massachusetts, Air National Guard, have access to this kind of information, we should expect leaks like this to happen a lot more often. I have a feeling something's off here.
Let me answer your question, because Garland and I raised the same question yesterday. And last night I was watching the news, and one of the intelligence aficionados that was on either MSNBC or CNN said, oh, well, you see, once you have a clearance as an intelligence officer, no matter what your level, you then have access to the entire network. And I said to myself, that does not make sense, Caleb Maupin.
Yeah, well, then why do they have these different levels then? Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me.
This is what they said, and so we know if it's said on CNN, it must be true.
Well, yeah, there's just so much of this. And what happens, from what we've seen in recent years, Caleb, everything from let's just say this, the pro-Ukrainian sailboat story, you just, no matter what comes out anymore, Russiagate, you always get a feeling that you're being had. You get a feeling that it's a lies. And now, and pretty much 99% of the time, a year or two later, you look back and it was. So to be consistent, if I didn't know anything about this story, I'd say, don't believe it. And a year from now, you'll look back and say, what do you know? It was all a lie. I mean, let's face it, consistency is the safest bet, Caleb.
Yeah, I mean, something seems off. You have to wonder. I mean, at this point, it's very clear there are big differences behind closed doors. If you listen to what's being said by Marjorie Taylor Greene right now, you listen to what's being said by Tulsi Gabbard right now. You look at a lot of dissonant voices that are coming to the surface, and you have to wonder if these documents being released was not simply the will of one 21-year-old who was in a Discord server and wanted to impress his buddies, you have to wonder if this is this guy's the fall guy for a bigger division, and that there are real differences about Ukraine policy within the Pentagon. I mean, we know that there have been for a long time. Michael Flynn was forced out of the Trump administration for his friendliness to Russia. This was a very important military figure, and if he can be that high up and have the differences that he had, there are other forces that are, and there are other military people who are speaking up and saying things. And I have a feeling there are deeper divisions within the Pentagon itself. And my theory is that these documents were released by a faction that goes much higher up than this 21-year-old Air National Guardsman. And it's indicative of differences within the Pentagon apparatus. I have no way of knowing that, obviously, but that's what it looks like to me. And you have to wonder, I mean, is it possible maybe he was given access to things he wouldn't normally be given access to with the understanding he might leak them? If he was kind of a useful idiot for somebody, as they might say, right? Somebody, they profiled him as somebody who might be likely to leak these things, and suddenly he got access when he wouldn't have gotten them before. That's one possibility. The other thing that many people have pointed out, which is interesting, is that this young man is very much, he's like a stereotype of a Trump-supporting conservative, of your, young gun enthusiast, racist, conservative Christian, and that the media has been playing that up quite a bit as well, and that raises questions. And the U.S. government has also said it's going to increase its surveillance of the internet because of this. And they're saying that, yes, there's going to be more surveillance of the internet and private citizens' computers, et cetera. So that raises some questions as well. But at the end of the day, we don't really know what happened. What we do know is that over 100 documents revealing another side to U.S.-Ukraine policy have hit the internet, and that the information in those documents is not thrilling. What we also know is that Seymour Hersh has come out with information indicating that the corruption of the Zelensky regime and the generals in Ukraine is massive. Mm-hmm. So I think that we can take a look at what we've got and speculate that it may indicate things are more divided behind closed doors than they lead us to believe, in their public releases.
And to your point, I think it's important for people listening to this conversation to walk away from the conversation just asking themselves, does this story make sense? I repeat, does this story, as it's being portrayed in mainstream media, does the story make sense? Garland and I were talking about the kind of information that was leaked. That had to come from Lloyd Austin's office. That had to come from somebody in the Joint Chiefs. This stuff was not low-level, low-hanging fruit. There's somebody in the DOD that isn't happy, and they want to be sure that the American people know they're not happy. And the other point I'll make, to your point about they're now attacking or highlighting this guy's personality, this reminds me of, as Garland pointed out, the Russiagate story. Ignore the content of the emails and pay attention to the narrative that Russia hacked into the server. That's a distraction. Am I off base here, Caleb Maupin?
No, I think you're completely on point in what you're saying. And that raises some questions as well. And I just, the whole thing, like you said, the more you look into it, it just doesn't seem right. And we're being told to believe it and take it for what it is. Something's off. Something's off.
Quick analogy. Folks, if you're at the fish market and it doesn't smell right, don't buy the fish.
Exactly. And I'll just add this. And it's awful hard to get 2,000 pounds of high explosives on a stinking sailboat. But that being said, just throwing that out there, just, Also, Macron has been in China, and lots of things going on. I want to get your thoughts on when it comes to that. You've got Macron going to China and basically saying, hey, we want to do business with China. This whole business about decoupling with China doesn't work for us. And I got to add this, Lula goes over there in the last day or so and says, you know what? all of the global South, we need to be doing our business in dollars. This business out of dollars. We need to drop the dollars. This business about the IMF ain't working for us. Put that together, Caleb. What are we looking at here?
Well, I think that Macron's going over there and doing what he's doing is very, very important because Macron may not be able to speak out about the Ukraine issue as a member of NATO, et cetera. But this is a big break with U.S. foreign policy in another pretty big area. For him to say that he doesn't want to see the Taiwan situation escalate, to basically criticize the United States and urge EU countries not to go along with the United States in escalation against China, that's pretty big. And it's important. And it indicates other things. I will add that, I think the unrest in France right now is probably a factor in him doing this. It's very clear the people that have been on the streets and the unrest, part of what they are demanding, a widespread sentiment among the protesters is that they don't want France to just be a puppet of the United States. And they want the leaders of France to stick up for the population, stick up for their domestic economy. So I think that could be a factor as well. I mean, that Macron needs to indicate to some degree or other that he's heard the protesters and the people rioting in the streets of France right now who are angry about their pensions and angry about the French economy collapsing amid the U.S. adventures in Ukraine and hostility to Russia and China. That said, it's also important to note that, when you talk about geopolitics, the European mainland, France and Germany in particular, France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, those countries, and the United States and Britain have very different geopolitical interests. And one can interpret World War I and World War II as, the result of struggle for control of the European mainland between domestic wealthy interests on the European mainland and the British and Americans who kind of dominate the trade routes and have, control of more the global financial aspect and the oil markets. And there has long been a push and pull. And that has been going on for hundreds of years. And as the European countries rose, and as we saw the rise of imperialism, there was always a push and pull between the European mainland and the Atlanticist powers of the United States and Britain. So these divisions and these different interests certainly are always there beneath the surface.
Let me approach this from a slightly different way. Annalena Baerbock, German foreign minister, she is on her way to China if she isn't already there. She goes on the heels of von der Leyen and Macron going. Lula's gone. I mean, all roads are leading through Beijing. And what do you make of all of these folks? And that's not even taking into account Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all these folks are talking to President Xi. Tony Blinken tries to bogart his way into China. They won't let him into Beijing. And then he decides not to go because of the weather balloon that scared him. What is
balloons
that?
Are scary.
They can be. They're scary balloons. What does that say? And hopefully, Caleb, you're not afraid of balloons. But what does this say to you in terms of the shift in the geopolitical dynamic?
Well, I think that this is indicative of how China has been operating really since the early 1970s. They have made an effort to establish relationships with countries, to start doing business with countries, and, kind of position themselves to be useful to countries in terms of economic development, to position themselves as, potential good economic partners. And when conflict escalates between countries, kind of keep their head low and not say much other than we want everyone to get along and peace through development. Years ago, when Hong Kong was still a protectorate of the British, on the bridge between Hong Kong and the People's Republic, the mainland, the Chinese government erected a very big banner. And that banner said, "Long live the great unity of the people of the world." And you think about that statement, this was at a time when China was very much still, it was the Mao era. They were presenting themselves as kind of the vanguard of world communism. But that statement, "Long live the great unity of the people of the world," it's not a particularly communist statement. That doesn't say revolution or chaos or overthrow the Western colonizers. It's just kind of long live the great unity of the people of the world indicates that they had this vision of kind of bringing countries together. And, at one point, China was putting forward what they called the three worlds theory. And they were arguing that there was the United States and the Soviet Union. They argued with the two first world countries, the two great powers. And then they described Europe as the second world. But they argued that China's role in the world was that they were going to unify and help develop the third world. And that this third world would be the basis of the world, getting beyond Western capitalism and imperialism. And that China would position itself as the center of this third world in a different sense than we use third world in the West, a very different sense than that. But this was their theory of three worlds. Now, that theory was repudiated, when Deng Xiaoping took power. They said they no longer held on to the three worlds theory. But I think the relationships that China started then, when they built the China-Pakistan Friendship Highway, that was the highest elevated road in the world. And they did that with a very right-wing military Pakistani dictatorship, but they were cooperating with them. And if you look at, China's work in Tanzania that started during those years, where they sent Chinese technicians to Africa to build railroads, that was the beginning of something. And that China's strategy has very much been to position itself in the emerging economies of developing countries, make allies with countries that are rising up from poverty in Africa and South America and Eurasia and elsewhere. That has been China's long-term strategy, and it seems to have worked out pretty well for them. And now, with China being the second largest economy in the world, many countries around the world want to continue to get along with them. And, they've kind of proven that one can be mild in manner but bold in matter. China's statements since the 80s, at least, have always been very calm, always been very limited. They haven't been, making big dramatic geopolitical moves. They've just been making business deals, making friends, biding their time, and gradually building up their own economy. And it seems to have paid off.
I hate to ask you this, but you do know a lot about China, and you'd be the one that could answer this. A most unsavory video surfaced about the Dalai Lama slobbering all over a young boy. And it's since come out that the whole Tibetan movement was a CIA operation. What can you do? You have any comment on that, Caleb?
Sure. Well, a couple things. I mean, the first thing is everyone forgets the Tibet Civil War. The 1950s, there was a war in which 500,000 people died, where the United States was airdropping weapons and guerrilla fighters into Tibet. And many, many people died. I mean, it was like 500,000 people died. And it was an ugly conflict. Many atrocities were committed. And that, this image of the Dalai Lama as just a man of peace, they kind of leave out this big, huge war where he was on one side and 500,000 people died and a lot of innocent people got killed. And they leave out, that Tibet under the leadership of the Dalai Lama, the Buddhist regime, was not a particularly nice place. Feudalism is feudalism, no matter what religion you slap on top of it. And that the conditions that most of the population lived on under serfdom, under the Dalai Lama, were pretty awful. That said, the details of that particular video are interesting because, what we understand is that little boy was actually, he was breaking a big taboo, right? You're not supposed to, talk to the leader, right? I mean, he's like a god on earth. And this little boy was like 2 or 3 years old. He not only did he talk to the leader, but he asked the Dalai Lama for a hug, and the room kind of gasped when he did that. And so then the Dalai Lama responded by kind of being affectionate. But then when he said to the boy, "Suck on my tongue," which everyone's looking at this and saying, this is really, really gross, which it was, that was kind of the Dalai Lama more or less saying to the little boy, "Oh, you little whippersnapper, you're gonna talk to me like you're gonna not show proper royalty. Well, I'm gonna try to kind of humiliate you and ask you to do something kind of gross." And people see this as, these are feudal patriarchal traditions, which many traditional cultures have, right? The Dalai Lama is supposed to be respected in a certain way. You conduct yourself a certain way when he's around. And this little child, who was just a child and didn't really know, broke the tradition. His family gasped. His family apologized to the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama responded in kind of a playful but mean-spirited way, saying, "Okay, you broke the rules here. You didn't show me the proper homage, so I'm gonna embarrass you," kind of. And it's all kind of gross, but when it really gets down to it, feudal traditions like that are often quite gross. And the way people are humiliated, and particularly children, is a particularly gross thing. And that's the context in which I think that incident needs to be seen.
That is incredibly insightful, which is why we talk to Caleb Maupin.
I tell you what, Dalai Lama obviously ain't into social distancing.
Caleb Maupin, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate that analysis. We look forward to having you back.
Sure thing. Always a pleasure.
Folks, you're listening to The Critical Hour on Radio Sputnik. I'm Wilmer Leon, joined here by my co-host Garland Nixon. There's more on the other side. Stay tuned.